Why hello there, Starsoldier first back here with another video. And in this particular video, I'm looking at some of the games that I have in my collection. Some very interesting titles. Not a speck of dirt on this game. I like to collect for various retro consoles and preserve their history throughout time. And one such console, which is considered the Rolls Royce of vintage systems, is of course the Super Nintendo. With its high octane audio cues and various Mode 7 effects, it really stands out as one of the greatest 16-bit consoles of all time. Quite impressive. Being very rich means you have very high standards. So if you're gonna play a game, you expect it to be the best one possible. There are so many games out there with million-dollar ad campaigns and various other ways to make you buy that particular game, either on its release or for a continuation in its print run. However, not all those games meet our lofty expectations, especially mine. Yeah, so this is Starsoldier first. Top 10 most disappointing Super Nintendo titles out there. Let's have a look, shall we? Right, number 10 here is of course the very infamous Street Kombat. Now this was once a very popular Japanese anime game, Rama 1-ha, and the show became very popular. So naturally you want to bring that to the US and other North American markets. Sadly, in a boardroom meeting perhaps, they decided to Americanize. So the men and women aspect has been removed, and now you got a man in a rare tacky robot suit, or one in just a standard white collar attire with rip-out jeans and a tank top. Oh gosh. Oh, by the way, the game is absolutely terrible. Now this one in particular was going to be released on several different consoles in the era. Thanks again to Alan Beauregard for the recommendation of Street Kombat, but let's move on to another combat simulator, Rise of the Robots. Now I am very rich and I have several robots around my home to do various errands, but these robots have gone berserk and are ready to take over the world. So we have a brave cyborg ready to take on these robots and save our fair planet. The problem is the game is rather poor. Very generic fighting mechanics, very poor controls, and just overall, the game is a very chore to play. Now, you wouldn't believe it from the hype though. This was catered to be the next Street Fighter 2. Brian May of Queen even did the soundtrack. Sadly, it all didn't come together in the end, and Rise of the Robots, with its very mediocre, subpar gameplay, just doesn't rise to the occasion, I'm afraid. Yeah, thanks again to Paul Testa and Brendan Gemma for the excellent recommendation of this very poor Rise of the Robot game. The game was definitely lacking in depth compared to several different fun games out there, and it was quickly forgotten. Now here is Mortal Kombat. Now maybe I might offend you by saying that this game is particularly bad, but I'm not. It's excellent on the arcade and excellent on the fine 16-bit power-ups, the Sega Genesis. But one thing that really made it stand out from its contemporaries is that Mortal Kombat was very violent. Sadly, with a lot of Nintendo's strict family-oriented guidelines, a lot of the blood and violence had to be removed from this title. So it just didn't quite have that impact that it did in the arcades, especially with all the controversy removed. And that's why Mortal Kombat here on the Super Nintendo earns the number 8 spot on most disappointing games on the system. Sunsoft, a very prestigious company with famous titles like Blaster Master and the Pacman series, but sadly they didn't have a mascot. They decided to create their own Super Mario or Sonic the Hedgehog or Bonk and give us a very unique character that hopefully everybody in the whole family will enjoy. His name is Aero the Acrobat. Sadly, the gameplay on this game is rather shit, and I do not recommend it. Super Street Fighter 2, a pretty big deal back in 1994. The problem is, other than a few new characters and a few new special moves, you'll be hard pressed to notice any difference other than that to this glorified expansion pack. Problem is, the previous two games on the Super Nintendo, the original Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter 2 Turbo, were great hits for Capcom, and they were hoping this would be their next $1 million seller hit. Despite a few new features, this game didn't sell 1 million copies like they were projecting, and most people were burned out by the series at this point. How I love to put this game on the list, but this is Pacman 2 here on the Super Nintendo. Now, if you're expecting a much upgraded maze game from the popular 1980s and all that, well, sadly you're going to be very disappointed because this is more of an interactive cartoon disguised as a 2D platformer. Very unconventional, and it could work if it wasn't called Pacman 2. Now, in its original Japanese, it was called Hello Pacman, a much more serviceable name if you're branching off into a spin-off of Pacman. But here it's called a sequel. It's rather short, it's rather easy, and the gameplay is unremarkable. It's a nifty idea, but I'd rather it not be referred to as Pacman 2, the legendary sequel to the arcade hit of the 1980s and a video game staple. Now, this is the legendary Tetris 2 here on the Super Nintendo, but it's not legendary for being a great title, it's more legendary, of course, for being a disappointment. The gameplay feels more like akin to Dr. Mario and not the original iconic Tetris many knew and loved. And therefore, it was quite the disappointment when it came out here in 1993 and 1994. So this is the legendary Final Fight 2, a huge cultural game in the arcades during the 1980s, and it remained an exclusive here on the Super Nintendo since the original Super Nintendo port performed so well on that system. It just doesn't feel like that big sequel we all been hoping for. You can now travel around the world, fight different unique enemies. Sadly, making this a Super Nintendo exclusive also meant that you had to remove a lot of the fast-action gameplay and various arcade detail the original Final Fight was known for. You can only have 3 enemies on the screen at once. The gameplay is slow to a crawl if you're playing with 2 players at once. And the graphics and music were definitely a step down from what we're used to, especially with heavy competition from various markets like the amazing Streets of Rage 2 on the Sega Genesis. Now, David Medea, thank you for your recommendation. I believe you actually mentioned the original Final Fight on Super Nintendo as being a very disappointing title for the system, but I had to pick the sequel Final Fight 2 for its lack of improvements in the general brawl genre. Super Double Dragon. The graphics were kind of minuscule, nothing to really get too excited about, but it still had the great controls and great gameplay of the originals, and it's definitely worth checking out, and that's not on the list. But what is, however, is this one right here. Double Dragon 5, The Shadow Falls. Now, this one was recommended by no one actually, so never mind, but I simply had to put this on the list myself. Unlike the previous Double Dragons, this one is not a side-scrolling beat-em-up. You don't face like several different ruffians with your brother and you have to beat them up. No, it's one-on-one combat, tournament style, 2L3, Street Fighter 2 rules, Except the graphics definitely have this very awkward cartoony style which just doesn't work with the whole team rating of the game. It's your typical fighting game, sadly, that was even getting very out of date by usual Super Nintendo connoisseur that just wanted more. Especially by the time of 1995 when tastes were starting to differ to more advanced consoles. Double Dragon 5 The Shadow Falls. Definitely one not to fall for. Aww. And my number one pick for the most disappointing Super Nintendo game ever released in my opinion is none other than Actraiser 2. A good game on its own right. The problem is it changed so much from the original and I was highly disappointed with the end result. Now the original Actraiser, it was one of the greatest titles released for a Super Nintendo in its inaugural year. Actraiser 2 was a highly anticipated sequel and hopefully we will get the same glorious gameplay that was akin to the original. Sadly they decided to change a lot of the mechanics. Gone is a high octane original where you can just run and dash and pretty much anything that gets in your way you can pretty much slice through it without much of a care. In this game however, you have to play much more defensively. You gotta worry about your magic, which can be done in various ways, but it is not done with a single press of a button. Despite a nice graphical style, the game just doesn't have the same appeal that the original had, and it doesn't even have the groundbreaking simulation mode levels that made it such a different game than anything else currently on the market. We were expecting the same sort of prestige of the original. Sadly we did not get this in a sequel, and unlike others on the list here, like Pacman 2, Mortal Kombat, and even Rise of the Robots, yes, this game never saw a sequel after this screw up of a franchise. And that's why it is my most disappointing Super Nintendo release out there. Thanks again to Ron Dean and Joshua Jagger for your awesome recommendation of Actraiser 2, so I am not alone in this regard. So that was my top 10 list for Super Nintendo most disappointing games. Now like, comment, and subscribe, and favorite if you so choose, but chances are you already have. If you felt that I missed something, do please leave a comment down below and let your opinion be known, and I, Starsoldier the First, will personally have my secretary look at them. This is Starsoldier the First, just letting you know that your game should be vintage and well played. Over and out.